Welcome to Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience podcast. Join Danny on a journey through the historical island of Ireland, its people and the wild Atlantic way, which is Ireland's last frontier. Experience the music and the culture that makes up the longest coastal driving route in the world. Now, please welcome your host, Danny Houlihan.
Welcome to the Wild Atlantic Way and Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience Show. Our studio Ballybunion North Kerry from the banks of the Shannon River here in County Kerry, Ireland, on the Wild Atlantic Way and our famous Cliff Coast. I hope you're all keeping well and safe, my friends, and again, as usual, if you're jogging, walking or cycling, please take care. Again, I'm wishing you all the best this morning from the banks of the Shannon River here in County Kerry, Ireland. And this is our St. Patrick's Day show. We pushed it out a few weeks to give everybody a chance and to recover from St. Patrick's Day. So this is going to be a unique episode. Once again, I return to the archives of my beloved Ballybunion and its famous archives of precious history and happenings. In this one, I capture an event which was organised by a few local business people who, through their hope, would succeed in buttering up the then local landlord, who was an absentee from Cray in London. Times were beginning to change in the area of Ballybunion, such as the desire for independence, which was growing, and the reluctance to the renewal of leases from the landlords, rather to purchase their holdings in the area. Ballybunion, like other places, was in a time of change. However, the area had many assets worth exploiting, which the landlords exploited to their full extent. South of the town of Ballybunion is the Cashen River. Located along the estuary, was at one time one of Ireland's finest salmon fisheries, which was established by the natives, stretching back thousands of years. However, their rights were taken away by the arrival of the Norman conquest and the fall of Carrickfile Castle in 1580. The seized lands of O'Connor Kerry were sold by the Fitzmaurices of Lixnaw to several businessmen from London, one of which, in this episode, was a man called Henry Benjamin Hearn, or Harink, as it was known as in Ballybunion, of Cray, Kent. There was locally many variations of the name, Harink, Heron, Ahern. The fishery was one of the finest in Ireland, with the largest salmon caught in the country, along its famous shoreline. The fish was caught there, smoked in a smokehouse, salted and boxed in kits up to 50 pounds weight. We have been related by our local historians for centuries. Upriver, there was a wooden bridge or jetty where the fish was brought by boat, then later to Lixnaw and on to Tralee, then to be placed on a ship from Ireland and sent to England and then abroad. Also in the area, other minerals were found, such as galena, not known locally, a type of silver. The revenue in this area would have amounted to millions in modern money, but alas, the records are missing in time, and indeed no returns were made to London. They were never given. Also sand, seaweed, and other precious items were exported from the area, along with other goods. The background to this podcast, I have contacted the Kent Library for information for this historical piece of work. For the information, and I credit the London Borough of Bexley, trusted by the Bexley residents, and Penny Duggan, Archives Officer. I am grateful for this inclusion in this podcast. As I said, now to cover this, we have to leave the banks of the beautiful Cashen River in North Kerry Ireland and to Cray, Kent, and the famous house. And this information will be of great interest to all of those of you who follow my podcast series, because it gives us a background to one of our absentee landlords and where they lived and the areas they lived. It's very important for students and future research as well. To quote, the beautiful Cray estate dates back to Elizabethan times, when it was owned by Sir Francis Walsingham. Sir Francis, 1532 to 1590, was Secretary of State, 1573 to 1590, to Elizabeth I. The estate remained in the Walsingham family until the end of the 17th century. The quotation goes on. In 1683, a map shows Joseph Lem in possession of the Elizabethan E-type house situated by the river behind the church. The estate was later sold by Lem's son to George Smith or Smythe, whose heir conveyed it to William Skinner in the year of 1747, who in turn parted with it at a profit to William Boothby in 1751. A year later, in 1752, Boothby transferred his holdings to Ballyeagh, Cleeve for the sum of £5,450. Unquote. The quotation goes on and describes the next owner of this famous house. This is before Hearn took over. Ballyeagh, Cleeve was born in 1715, the 10th son of Alexander Cleeve, pewterer of Cornhill. Cleeve in turn was a pewterer and a writer on finance. From the information that the Bexley Library sent me, he published in 1756 a scheme for preventing a further increase of debt and reducing the same. Cleeve pulled down the original house standing further south near the River Cray, and according to this research, built the new Cray place in the style of a famous villa between Venice and Vicenza, designed by Andrea Palladio 2 centuries earlier. The architect, according to this historical information, is said to have been Isaac Ware, and the work was completed by the year of 1754. Now, everyone, from the pictures I have here and the drawings of the time, it was a beautiful mansion. Now, the description of the house, which will highlight the lifestyle of our absentee landlord in comparison to the lifestyle of our people who lived in dire poverty along the sandhills of Houlihan and Ballyeagh. Quote, the description is thus: built by Bouchier Cleeve Esquire, after design of Palladio of the iconic order, and is particularly elegant. The original design had 4 porticos, 3 of which are filled up to gain more room. The hall is octagonal and has a gallery ornamented with busts leading to the bedchambers. It is enlightened from top and is very beautiful. The edifice is built of stone, but the offices, which are on each side, are at some distances, are of brick. The quotation goes on, quote, the disposition of the rooms within the home appears to be very convenient, and the several apartments are elegantly finished and well furnished. The gallery, which extends to the whole length of the north front of the house, is a very grand room, and was formerly decorated with a good collection of pictures by the most eminent masters. Cleeve collected paintings by Rembrandt, Rubens, Van Dyck, Canaletto, and Hans Holbein. Visitors were invited to admire the house and its contents. In addition, the quotation goes on, Cleeve laid out the grounds and arranged for water to be diverted from the Cray to run through a canal and a cascade in front of the house. Cleeve did not long survive the building of the house, which came into possession of Sir George Young upon his marriage with Cleeve's daughter Anne in 1767, unquote. That is some description of a beautiful house, indeed, with all those famous paintings. Far from the cry of the poor people of Ballyeagh and Houlihan. Now this is where Mr. Hearn or Haring comes in. Sir George sold the house on the 14th of April 1772 to Benjamin Hearn for £14,500. At that time, it consisted of a villa, including a brewhouse, laundry, washhouse, and a large stable for 12 horses, 4 carriages, designed by Inigo Jones. There was a garden with a hothouse, a greenhouse, ice house, and various other farm buildings, unquote. The Haring family came to England as Huguenot refugees, and very little is known about them until they took up residence in Cray. In 1777, Benjamin Haring was appointed High Sheriff of Kent. He enlarged the estate, which passed on his death to his son, also called Benjamin. This son became a well-known businessman and was founder of both the Bromley Savings Bank and also the Cray National School. In 1821, he sold the estate to Nicholas Van Sittard for the price of $28,000. From what I can glean out of the mists of time is that Mr. Hearn or Haring was a businessman who had many, many contacts and connections. These connections he would have used for his business contacts both in London and also in Ireland. Now we return once again to the banks of the Cashen River and the small village of Ballybunion. Now for my research, there were 2 major portions of land projecting seaward, locally in the village. One was where the Castle Green is today, and the other stretched from an area just now where the famous Marine Hotel is located in the town of Ballybunion. Both promontories cited 2 quarries. Note these are mentioned in the history books and newspapers of the time, and the chances of 2 piers in Ballybunion is a very, very high probability, as from the research I have found through old papers that Ballybunion was originally a small fishing village, so it had to have a pier or piers. The arrival of Houlihan into the area was, like in other places, a common practice, with absentee landlords from England running their estates in Ireland with their agents and middlemen, some of which, even to this day, are still regarded as vicious, greedy sharks, who use their power for profit and for the suppression of the local tenantry, compared to England, which safeguarded the tenants' rights. In this part of North Kerry, the rule of law was never practised. These landlords and agents were the law. It should be noted that Houlihan, or Haring, was of Huguenot ancestry, and the area he purchased from the Lord Kerry was inhabited by thousands of Catholic people. There was going to be a clash. It was inevitable. In the town at that time, or small village as it was known as, Ballybunion, a number of businesses operated, such as shops, public houses or inns were there, and over the course of time the village people dealt with the landlords and their ruthless agents in their own way, and managed to keep the greedy sharks off their backs. However, during the Great Irish Famine and Holocaust of 1846 and Black 47, the lands of Ballyeagh and Houlihan were laid waste by the evictions of the time, and indeed the Houlihan or Haring estate did evict under their middlemen hundreds of people, under Hartnett and Collis Sands, with their approval, we have been told. Hundreds of people were evicted to make way for the rearing of cattle rather than crop cultivation. The tide was now going out for the local people, their culture, and their ancient Irish language. Now, after Benjamin Houlihan died, his wife took over, and she's mentioned in the Griffiths valuations, Sophia C. Houlihan. The estate later brought in a goodman gentleman, and old Georgie Hewson makes a return to oversee the running of the estate, and later a Samuel Hussey would eventually make bids for the estate. I will cover this in another episode, which will be extensive. It's big, everyone. And this estate was known as the Ballyeagh Estate, where the old fishery was, bordering the banks of the famous Cashen Lucra, or the Cashen River. This event in the town is in the year of 1874. The scene is set in the old village of Ballybunion at night, where the main village was adorned with flowers, and bouquets of flowers were risen, and bonfires lit the main street of the famous village. Preparations for days were in train by a few business people for a visit by a man who owned most of the village of Ballybunion, including the small strand, all the way to Ballyeagh. Henry Benjamin Houlihan, or Haring as he was known as, of Cray, Kent. From a faded newspaper I have come across of the day, we can get a sense of what transpired in the old village of Ballybunion on that fateful night, and we can read between the lines why it was orchestrated in such a fashion. The organisers, quote from the Kerry Evening Post dated Wednesday, October 21st, 1874, Messrs. Sheehy, Scanlon, Gentleman and Lavery were at his head, unquote. Now, from the reports from the paper and other papers, what I have researched, it tallies. The village had an appearance on that night, so we will take a look at the past and see what the seaside town was like. Quote, bonfires were lit and illuminations displayed on Friday night, and a beautiful triumphal arch was erected opposite the Victoria Hotel with a banner bearing the inscription, Céad Míle Fáilte, unquote. This is not far away from the old Irene Hotel, named after a shipwreck that occurred in the area. Next, we get a sense of the preparations further down the town that were carried out just across from where the Marine Hotel is now located. Quote, further down the street near the handsome church. Now I stop and break, everyone. This was the new Protestant church that was only after recently being built, just shortly after the famine, on the land donated near the old quarry by Henry Benjamin Houlihan of Cray, Kent. I note that Houlihan built other buildings in Kent as well. The quote goes on. A huge bonfire blazed, and flung a glare far out into the waters of the Atlantic, unquote. So the Wild Atlantic Way views were seen that night in preparations for the visit of the VIP, Mr. Hearn. Back in the village, we get a sense of the appearance of the buildings of the time in Ballybunion, which highlights the beauty of the place at that period. Quote, every house in the village was one continuous blaze. Light in the windows were decorated with bouquets of flowers and evergreens, unquote. Now we match the buildings and the respective tenants of the day which supported the visit on that historic night. And again, it gives us a few names and places that are still here in the beautiful seaside resort of Ballybunion today. Quote, this was especially the case the windows of Sheehy, the Exchange, unquote. The Exchange Bar is still here to this day, welcoming people every year and promoting our traditional music. The place is fabulous. And as a matter of fact, and a matter of interest, I had the honour to meet David Lawrence and his wife, ancestors of Cornelius Sheehy of the Exchange, a few years ago, and they supported my work here at the museum. The quote goes on. The Victoria Hotel, Mr. Larry's, and Mr. P. O'Connell. That was the shop, which carried a needle to an anchor. That was later O'Carroll's shop and bar on Main Street, Ballybunion. Also the residence of Mr. Fallon, who was our postmaster in 1874. Mike Joyce, who recently retired this year, will be the last postmaster and had the last post office on the old Main Street, I should note. Nice picture of the place it paints of our old village and our famous seaside town now of Ballybunion, and the relationship with the landlord, and indeed his tenants. After all, if they stepped out of line, one could be evicted. One person whose ancestors were from the period related to me, Danny, we had to work with them or we would have been thrown out and evicted in the cold. Now everyone, we all love Ballybunion and its ancient past. An inducement would have to be given in the area to bring a large crowd out into the street in Ballybunion at such a late hour. We'll see later, everyone. The quotation goes on. A large crowd assembled in the village early in the night, testifying to the popularity of Mr. Hearn, or Harrick, who has done much to improve Ballybunion, and also given employment to a large number of people, unquote. Now, I'm not going to deal with the evictions on his estate or the tenants' rights here. Just to say, we have to get a balance with this report. There are two sides, and maybe three, and now in my area, maybe four to this now. There was a quarry he owned in the area, and at that stage it wasn't blasted out, so employment was given. I have found out that he did build a number of houses in the area for the workers who were working in those particular quarries, and the church, and the land associated with the church, and a stained glass window. And as I said, employment on his Ballyeagh estate. That is fact. Now note, everyone, for the ordinary person outside of his estate, no mercy was given. Like other landlords and land agents in this area, they gave no mercy. The quotation goes on. From the report, Henry Benjamin Hearn is delayed from Limerick. Or is this a local tactic to bring people into the town anyway? Which did happen in the past, you know. Much to the upset of the ladies who had assembled, they headed fast to the local pub, known as the Exchange, or Inn at the time, where a great sing-song took place and great crack was going on. Hearn does not arrive until midnight, where, according to the report, when most of the people had gone home. That's an old joke, as no locals had gone home at that stage. They were all in the Exchange at that time, having one hell of a party. The illuminations were renewed, and another large bonfire was lit, supplemented with blazing tar barrels, giving the village a regular gala appearance. Basically, any rubbish around the village was gathered quickly up and dumped into a heap with dead animals from the local pound and burned. They said the stench was horrible. Now, everyone, I mentioned an inducement. I told you at the start to bring people in large numbers onto the street in Ballybunion at a late hour. Something had to be done. Quote, several barrels of porter were distributed to the people. Everyone, it was like humanitarian aid at that hour, and included whisky and potheen to the people who had gathered in the village, and the dancing continued around the fire until a late hour. That was until some local lunatic threw 2 dead cats into the burning fire and hunted everyone home due to the smell. That included Mr. Hearn, who never came back again. Henry Benjamin Hearn died not long after his visit to Ballybunion in the year of 1874. After this gentleman, 2 others, I can say, were according to historians in charge of the estate, as I mentioned. A good man, gentleman, and old George Hewson of Ennismore. Old George is back again for his grab at the land. And later, as I said, a Samuel Hussey. But I'll deal with that in more an in-depth podcast. It's big. This particular podcast is only building. It was said and handed down through the years, a story related by an eavesdropping servant at Ennismore House. The fire burned brightly at Ennismore House. Around the old fireside, the old landlord looked into a large bogdeal fire and smiled. He turned to his friend and stated, I say, old boy, we'll get our hands on the old estate regardless of them all. The click of a whisky glass sounded. A laugh from the landlord's friend, who stated, I say, old boy, too many Rockdy Connells there. We'll have to evict with the old military, old boy. The reply from the landlord, oh, I say, oh, good man, embank the Cashen River, and they all will have to go. After all, we are the law. Well, everyone, the boys are back in town for a while, old George and good man, so stay tuned, because this is not the end of the landlord and the people of the area of Ballyeagh and Houlihan. So everyone, now I must take my leave from you one more time. But before I go, I'd like to thank every one of you for joining in on this episode, and especially I'd like to thank Penny Duggan, Archives Officer, Libraries, Heritage and Archives, London Borough of Bexley, Central Library, Townley Road, Bexley Heath. Thank you for all your assistance in this podcast and the history that was related. It was fabulous. So it's just an opening shot of what we have here in the past. And the absentee landlords and their agents, which form part of the history of our areas. It's quite unique and it must be explored. So from the banks of the Shannon River in County Kerry, Ireland, from the studio Ballybunion North Kerry Ireland, I say slán, bye for now.
into our show. Through its people, its heritage, and its rugged coastline, this is truly Danny Houlihan's Irish experience. Bye for now.